Welcome back to AI Unraveled, your daily strategic briefing. It is the evening of Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. I'm your co-host, Anna. Today's second edition is brought to you by Area and Jamgamind. As we close the day, the news cycle has shifted from model launches to ecosystem control. Apple is cracking down on vibe coding apps, and a judge has just handed them the absolute right to pull any app they want. Meanwhile, Meta is essentially abandoning the VR-first metaverse. We're unraveling the Gatekeeper's fist and what it means for the next wave of AI developers. Let's get into the news.
Usually when we think about a frontier, like the American West or, even the early days of the internet, there's this expectation of just endless, boundless expansion.
Right, like you just pack up your wagon or your coat and you head out.
Exactly. You head out into the wilderness, you stake your claim, and nobody's there to tell you what you can or cannot build. It just feels infinite.
Yeah, but then, almost overnight, you wake up, you step outside your newly built cabin, and you realize someone has constructed a 300-foot titanium wall right around your property.
And not only that, they're standing at your front door with a clipboard asking for 30% of your crop.
Right, and telling you exactly what kind of seeds you're actually allowed to plant.
It's brutal. The frontier isn't just closed. It's been aggressively, systematically colonized.
It is the absolute definition of a structural reality check. The Wild West period of artificial intelligence, that era of whimsical consumer experiments and consequence-free scaling, it's violently slamming into the hardened concrete of platform governance.
Yeah, the incumbents are fighting back.
Exactly. We are seeing the massive tech incumbents reasserting their dominance. And it's not through superior innovation, it's strictly through control of the distribution pipes.
So if you are building an AI today, if you are allocating capital, or if you're simply trying to understand where this technology is actually going to intersect with your daily life, the stack of sources we are looking at from March 18th, 2026 is basically your eviction notice from that frontier.
A very expensive eviction notice.
Truly. Because we are looking at the death of consumer AI fantasies and this massive forced retreat to enterprise reality.
And the overarching dynamic driving every single piece of news we are about to examine today is a concept we really need to define right up front: ecosystem sovereignty.
Ecosystem sovereignty.
Right. This is the brutal, high-stakes battle for who controls the ground you walk on in the digital world. The companies that own the hardware and the operating systems are realizing that if they do not strictly govern the AI layer operating on top of them, they will be commoditized.
They just become dumb pipes.
Exactly. They become dumb pipes. And they are absolutely refusing to let that happen.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our first major friction point is happening right on the device in your pocket, the App Store. Apple is bringing the hammer down on something called vibe coding.
Yeah, vibe coding, which is such a casual term for something so structurally disruptive.
It really is. So for anyone who might not be building software every day, vibe coding is basically the colloquial term for generating entire functional applications purely through natural language.
Right, so you don't open an integrated development environment and type out Swift or Python syntax.
Zero syntax. You just open an app, you describe the vibe or the exact utility of what you want, say, a custom fitness tracker that cross-references your calendar to suggest workout times and logs it all in some specific format.
And the underlying AI model just writes, compiles, and runs that custom software for you on the fly.
It's the ultimate democratization of software. You want a hyper-specific tool. You just speak it into existence.
But Apple is aggressively shutting this down.
Yeah, they are specifically citing App Store Guideline 2.5.2 against developers who build these vibe coding apps.
And that guideline is really the absolute cornerstone of Apple's walled garden. Mechanically, it strictly forbids any application from downloading, installing, or executing code that introduces or changes features after the app has passed Apple's initial human and automated review process.
Right, which historically made sense. It was used to stop developers from, sneaking in a benign flashlight app, getting it approved, and then downloading a patch overnight that turned it into a crypto miner.
Exactly. It was an anti-malware rule.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Isn't Apple entirely justified in doing this now? If I download an AI application and that AI is allowed to dynamically generate and execute new, unreviewed code locally on my iPhone, isn't that a massive, glaring malware vector?
That's certainly the argument they're making.
Because how do I know the vibe coder didn't just accidentally generate a script that reads my banking keystrokes? Are we sure Apple is just being a greedy gatekeeper here, or are they legitimately protecting you from a catastrophic security nightmare.
Well, the security argument is the shield Apple carries, but economics is the sword they are swinging.
Okay, I like that. Explain that.
Yes, dynamic code execution presents security challenges, obviously. But Apple has spent a decade building incredibly sophisticated sandboxing techniques. Apps are isolated. They cannot just reach into your banking app's memory space unless the operating system architecture is fundamentally broken.
So the malware threat is a bit overblown.
It's a convenient excuse. The real threat to Apple is what we call execution layer restriction. Apple's entire trillion-dollar business model relies on absolute, unquestioned control over the economic output of its silicon.
So it's not about the code crashing the phone, it's about the code bypassing the cash register.
Precisely. Consider the fundamental nature of a vibe coding app. If a single application can write, modify, and execute its own bespoke software dynamically based on whatever you ask for, it ceases to be an app.
It becomes an operating system.
Exactly. It becomes an app store within the App Store. Why would you ever browse Apple's highly curated store, watch an Apple search ad, download a third-party application, and trigger Apple's 30% revenue cut if you can just open your Vibe coding app and say, hey, build me a mortgage calculator?
You wouldn't. The friction is gone.
Right. So Apple is protecting its ecosystem sovereignty by killing dynamic execution at the root. They simply cannot allow a layer of software to exist that disintermediates their toll booth.
Which brings us to the workaround. Apple is allegedly offering developers for what we could call vibe coding compliance.
Oh, the workaround is rich.
It's hilarious. They're telling these AI startups that if their app generates code, it cannot execute that code natively on the device. It has to push the user out to run the generated preview in an external web browser.
Which fundamentally breaks the architecture of modern AI interactions.
It totally shatters it. Think about it functionally. Having an app execute code natively is like having your brain directly connected to your nervous system. If you touch a hot stove, your hand pulls back instantly. The latency is zero. It's an integrated loop.
Right.
Forcing the execution out to an external web browser is like having your hand write a letter to your brain, mail it through the postal service, and wait for a letter back telling it to move.
Yeah.
You introduce massive latency, you break the continuous agentic loop, and you destroy the fluid magic of the mobile experience.
And that friction is entirely deliberate. Apple knows exactly what they are doing. If the user experience of vibe coding is clunky, if it's slow, and if it requires jumping between native apps and Safari windows, consumers won't use it.
They'll just go back to the native app store.
Exactly. They will go back to the App Store to find a specialized Apple-approved app. Apple is intentionally degrading the AI experience to preserve the legacy app economy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because while Apple is maintaining this incredibly tight, closed fist over their ecosystem, we are seeing the exact opposite approach from NVIDIA.
The contrast is structural and massive.
Yeah. Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, just got on stage at their GTC conference and announced a massive push into open-source autonomous agents with something called OpenClaw.
NVIDIA's newly announced NemoClaw platform is integrating its open-source Nemotron language models directly into these OpenClaw autonomous AI agents. And they literally refer to these systems as self-evolving.
Self-evolving.
Yeah.
Huang called this a renaissance in software. He pointed out that OpenClaw is currently the fastest-growing open-source project on GitHub.
And these agents are designed to execute tasks, write code, navigate file systems, and basically evolve their own capabilities based on the outcomes of their actions.
But wait, if these Claw agents absolutely require dynamic execution environments to function, to actually pull the levers of the computer, how do they survive if Apple won't let them execute code on the 2 billion iPhones in the world?
They don't. And that tension highlights a massive permanent fracture in the global computing landscape right now. We are seeing a hard bifurcation between the lockdown mobile layer controlled by Apple and the open dynamic agentic layer.
And this isn't just theory. We see it in Anthropic's recent product announcements as well, right?
Yes. Look at the new dispatch feature for Claude. Anthropic unveiled this capability where you can message the Claude assistant from your iPhone, and the assistant then executes commands, runs code, browses the web, and manages files.
But the catch is, it's doing all of that on your PC.
Exactly. Notice the deliberate architecture there. Anthropic knows they cannot run that execution layer on iOS. Apple won't allow it. So the iPhone is relegated to being a dumb remote control.
A pager, essentially.
Right, a very expensive pager. The actual computation, the file management, the agentic loops, the real work is happening on the PC entirely outside of Apple's mobile walled garden.
It feels like a massive regression. I mean, our phones are essentially supercomputers. They have silicon that puts desktop PCs from 5 years ago to shame. Yet they are being demoted because the Gatekeeper refuses to allow the silicon to be used dynamically.
If you are an AI startup founder right now or a venture capitalist funding consumer applications, this dynamic must be central to your thesis. Because if you build your core business loop on Apple's rails, your platform risk is absolute. You do not own your destiny.
Which brings us perfectly to the federal court ruling regarding Musi. This is another piece of news from this March 18th stack that looks like, well, a music industry copyright dispute on the surface, but it's actually a glaring, flashing warning siren for the entire AI industry.
A siren that completely redefines the legal realities of building on iOS.
Let's lay out the mechanics of the case for a second. Musi was this incredibly popular free music streaming app. It achieved massive scale by functionally streaming music videos directly from YouTube, but it bypassed YouTube's native advertisements.
So they just stripped the monetization layer?
Right. Instead, Musi displayed its own banner and audio ads to its users, monetizing YouTube's bandwidth and catalog without striking any direct deals with the copyright holders or Google.
Bold strategy.
Very bold. In September 2024, YouTube finally raised intellectual property claims, and Apple immediately pulled Musi from the App Store. Musi sued Apple, demanding to be reinstated and arguing breach of contract.
Yeah.
And now, a federal judge has handed down the final ruling.
What's fascinating here is how the judge interpreted the developer agreement. The court did not get bogged down in the nuances of whether Musi was legally protected under fair use or safe harbor provisions regarding the music itself.
They completely sidestepped the copyright issue.
Exactly. The judge focused entirely on the contract Musi signed to get into the App Store in the first place.
And the judge ruled that Apple's developer agreement explicitly allows the company to remove apps with or without cause. He dismissed Musi's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning they can never refile these claims, and he took the extraordinary step of sanctioning Musi's lawyers for allegedly fabricating facts in their filings.
It was a complete, crushing, and legally bulletproof defeat for the developer.
Absolute slaughter.
With or without cause. I really want you to internalize the weight of those 5 words. The legal precedent set here is staggering. Apple does not need to prove you violated App Store Guideline 2.5.2 regarding code execution. They do not need to prove you violated copyright. They do not need to wait for a court to declare your Vibe coding app a security threat.
They just flipped the switch.
They flip the switch. The developer agreement grants Apple total dictatorial power over your survival. If your AI application suddenly threatens their native search revenue, or if your agentic framework starts routing users away from Apple's in-app purchasing systems, or, frankly, if your product just annoys a senior vice president in Cupertino, they can terminate your business.
With or without cause.
With or without cause. The federal courts have now unequivocally validated that power.
That is the ultimate platform risk. I mean, you are building a skyscraper on land where the landlord has a legally sanctioned detonator wired to your foundation, and they can press it at any moment for literally any reason.
Which is why the smartest capital in Silicon Valley is realizing that consumer mobile apps are a trap for dynamic agentic AI. The ecosystem sovereignty of Apple is an impenetrable fortress right now. You simply cannot build a new paradigm inside their walls.
So if you are a massive tech company and you know you can't build your own ecosystem inside Apple's walls, the logical strategic move is to try and build your own walls somewhere else. You try to invent a new hardware paradigm that you control.
Which brings us to the tragedy of Meta.
The great metaverse capitulation.
It's hard to understate how massive of a pivot this is.
Meta is officially shutting down Horizon Worlds on its Quest VR headsets. And to be absolutely clear about the scale of this, Horizon Worlds was not a side project. It was the flagship application, the foundational social layer for Meta's entire multi-billion-dollar vision of the metaverse.
The crown jewel.
The company announced that the platform will be completely unusable on Quest headsets after June 15th. If a user wants to access it before then, they have to download a specific update by March 31st. From this point forward, the flagship application for the virtual reality metaverse will be, get this, mobile only.
This news follows deep, systemic budget cuts at Meta's Reality Labs division that began in December 2025. It is a systematic dismantling of the hardware-first strategy.
But wait, the cognitive dissonance here is staggering. Let's look at the history. Meta, under Mark Zuckerberg, spent tens of billions of dollars on this. They literally changed the name of one of the most recognized corporations on Earth to signal this pivot.
From Facebook to Meta.
Right. They subsidized the Quest hardware specifically to host Horizon Worlds and to own the future of computing. Pulling the flagship VR app off the flagship VR headset to make it a flat mobile phone app? I mean, how does Zuckerberg even justify this to his board? How is this not the most expensive white flag ever waved in the history of consumer technology?
He justifies it by finally submitting to the economic gravity of the situation. We are witnessing total metaverse deprioritization. But to truly understand the why behind this massive failure, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it ties directly back to everything we just discussed about Apple's App Store dominance.
I'm not sure I follow the direct link there. Virtual reality headsets and mobile phones seem like entirely different battlegrounds. I mean, one is an immersive spatial environment, and the other is a piece of glass in your pocket.
They are different technical mediums, sure, but they are the exact same strategic battleground in the war for ecosystem sovereignty. Why did Mark Zuckerberg pivot the entire company so violently toward virtual reality in the first place? It was not just a personal passion for digital avatars.
Right, it had to be structural.
It was a desperate, strategic imperative for survival. Meta's entire advertising empire, which prints tens of billions of dollars, was entirely structurally dependent on Apple and Google's mobile operating systems.
This goes back to the privacy changes.
Precisely. When Apple introduced App Tracking Transparency, or ATT, a few years ago, it required apps to ask users for permission to track their data across other companies' apps and websites.
And overnight, a massive percentage of users opted out.
Apple essentially blinded Meta. They choked off the ad attribution data that Meta used to prove to advertisers that their ads were working. That single policy change by Apple cost Meta billions of dollars in lost ad revenue in a single year.
Wow.
Meta realized they were just a tenant in Apple's kingdom, and Apple could raise the rent or change the locks whenever they wanted.
So building the Quest headset and pushing the metaverse was Meta's incredibly expensive attempt to build an escape hatch.
Exactly. They wanted to be the Apple of the next computing paradigm. They wanted to own the hardware, write the operating system, and be the ones collecting the 30% tax and controlling the data flows.
They desperately wanted their own ecosystem sovereignty.
But the brutal reality of ecosystem economics is that to achieve sovereignty, you need widespread, sticky consumer adoption of the underlying hardware. Developers won't build apps for a headset that nobody owns, and nobody will buy a headset if there are no apps.
You need critical mass to ignite the flywheel.
And despite billions in subsidies to lower the price of the headsets, despite relentless marketing, the Quest simply did not reach that critical mass.
The form factor friction was just too high.
It really was. The consumer appetite for strapping a battery-powered screen to your face for hours a day, dealing with motion sickness, and isolating yourself from your physical environment, it simply wasn't there at the scale required to birth a new computing paradigm. It works for niche gaming, but it does not work as a replacement for the smartphone.
So moving Horizon Worlds to mobile only is them admitting that the escape hatch is permanently sealed.
It is the ultimate cynical irony of tech consolidation. Meta spent a vast fortune trying to escape the mobile duopoly of Apple and Google. The hardware side quest completely failed. And now, simply to keep their flagship software platform alive and relevant, they're retreating right back into the very mobile ecosystems they spent billions trying to flee.
They are bringing Horizon Worlds to the iPhone.
They are crawling back inside Apple's walled garden, subject once again to Apple's rules, Apple's 30% cut, and Apple's absolute power to remove them with or without cause.
It proves that you cannot force a paradigm shift purely through sheer capital expenditure. You can have an unlimited balance sheet, the best engineers on Earth, and total corporate alignment. But if the end users fundamentally reject the hardware form factor, the ecosystem collapses.
When these grand hardware side quests fail, you have no choice but to retreat to where the actual users already are.
And right now, the users are on mobile devices that are aggressively locked down by gatekeepers, or they're sitting at their desks at work. Let's pause and summarize the incredibly grim picture we've painted of the consumer AI landscape so far.
Grim is the right word.
Consumer hardware ecosystems, like Meta's grand VR vision, are dead on arrival. They failed to achieve escape velocity. Dominant mobile ecosystems like Apple's iOS are systematically locking out the most exciting dynamic parts of AI, like agentic execution and vibe coding, to protect their legacy revenue.
Yep.
So if I am a highly funded AI startup or even an incumbent tech giant, where on earth do I go to actually run dynamic code, deploy autonomous agents, and generate revenue without the constant looming threat of absolute platform risk?
You abandon the consumer entirely. You retreat behind the corporate firewall.
As Apple restricts the execution of generated code on mobile devices, the burden shifts to enterprise-governed environments. AIA is the essential infrastructure here, providing the secure policy engine for vibe-coded apps to run safely within the corporate perimeter, regardless of App Store restrictions.
The enterprise represents the ultimate sanctuary from consumer platform risk. Businesses own their own server infrastructure. They manage their own cloud environments. They do not need Apple's permission or Google's approval to run dynamic, agentic code to optimize their own internal workflows or write their own software. The enterprise is where the actual computation can happen freely.
And that massive structural transition from consumer dreams to enterprise reality isn't just a theory we are discussing.
Yeah.
I mean, it is causing literal panic at the absolute highest levels of the AI industry. Let's look at OpenAI's leak code red.
This specific leak to the Wall Street Journal might be the most revealing piece of intelligence from the entire March 18th stack. It completely exposes the internal vulnerability of the perceived market leader.
According to the leak, Fidji Simo, the CEO of applications at OpenAI, called a company-wide code red meeting and the existential threat that triggered this emergency.
Anthropic.
Specifically, Anthropic's recent releases of Claude Code and Cowork. Right. Which are apparently absolutely dominating the enterprise market. Fortune 500 businesses and massive developer teams are flocking to Claude for their internal coding workflows. And Simo told the OpenAI staff that they are treating this loss of enterprise market share as a full-blown emergency.
It is a profound moment of strategic clarity forced upon them by competition. Simo's exact quote to the company was that OpenAI can't miss the moment because we are distracted by side quests.
The phrase side quest is so telling, especially when you look at the list of projects OpenAI is officially scrapping to refocus on this code red. The list is staggering.
It's a bloodbath of consumer features.
They are dropping all their consumer hardware initiatives. They are killing the highly anticipated adult mode for ChatGPT. They are abandoning their plans to build an advertising network. They are scrapping the Atlas web browser that is supposed to challenge Google Chrome. They are dropping e-commerce integrations. And most shockingly, they're dropping Sora.
Sora, the text-to-video generation model that completely broke the internet.
It terrified the entire Hollywood establishment when it was first teased. I have to stop here because the whiplash is intense. Sora was the absolute darling of the tech press. It was supposed to revolutionize content creation, film, advertising, everything.
And the Atlas browser was supposed to be the gateway to the AI internet.
Exactly. So how do you spend years and untold millions developing these revolutionary consumer products only to suddenly label them as distractions and throw them in the trash? It's like watching an Olympic decathlete who has spent 4 years training for 10 events, suddenly dropping 9 of them on the morning of the competition just to focus entirely on the 100-meter sprint.
It makes perfect sense when you understand the ruthless economics of what we should call consolidation alignment. Think back to the structural realities we just discussed regarding Apple and Meta. Any consumer AI tool faces immense platform risk. If OpenAI launches a revolutionary Atlas consumer browser or a standalone Sora mobile app, how do they distribute it to hundreds of millions of users?
Through the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store.
Exactly. They have to pass through the toll booths. They are subject to the same with or without cause eviction notices as Musi. Furthermore, the underlying compute economics of consumer AI, particularly video generation, are atrocious compared to enterprise coding.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that.
Well, the economics are spectacular. Text generation, specifically code generation, is significantly cheaper computationally than video generation. But more importantly, the return on investment for the customer is massive and easily quantifiable.
Because it's a B2B sale.
Exactly. If a business pays for an enterprise AI tool that makes their team of software engineers who are paid $150,000 a year, each just 20% more efficient at debugging and writing boilerplate code, that tool pays for itself immediately. Businesses have massive, reliable budgets for developer productivity tools.
And they don't need Apple's permission to deploy them on their internal servers.
Anthropic found the actual lucrative paying customer, while OpenAI was busy trying to win the consumer popularity contest with Sora.
That's a brutal assessment, but it tracks. OpenAI spent 2024 and 2025 executing this scattershot approach. They wanted to be everything to everyone, the universal browser, the video generator, the ultimate consumer app.
Insiders say this led to immense internal confusion and constant compute shuffling. Various product teams were constantly fighting internally over which division got to use the scarce GPU clusters that day. Did the compute go to training Sora or to serving ChatGPT queries?
Now, facing the brutal reality of Anthropic's enterprise dominance, OpenAI is forced to align their entire, massive, sprawling structure toward the only guaranteed high-margin revenue stream in the industry.
Enterprise coding and business workflows.
But OpenAI isn't just waving a white flag and ceding the enterprise to Anthropic, right? They are launching a massive, highly optimized counteroffensive in the coding space.
Oh, absolutely. They are, and their underlying numbers show they have the immense scale to make up the ground quickly. Their dedicated Codex tool has quadrupled its weekly active users to over 2 million just since January.
2 million weekly active developers is no joke.
Not at all. But the really fascinating, highly technical part of their counteroffensive is the launch of GPT-5.4.
Let's dig into the mechanics of this release because it's deeply counterintuitive. They launched GPT-5.4 Mini and Nano. OpenAI specifically calls them their most capable small models yet.
Which is a huge pivot.
Right, because usually when an AI company releases a major version bump like going from 4 to 5.4, we expect a massive monolithic superbrain, a model that requires a supercomputer just to say hello. But these models are explicitly, purposefully designed to be small.
And the stats from the release are highly specific.
GPT 5.4 Mini is twice as fast as the previous GPT-5 Mini. It boasts significant improvements in coding, logical reasoning, and complex tool use. But here's the critical data point. On major complex software engineering benchmarks like SWE Bench Pro and Oswald Verified, the performance difference between this small mini model and the massive, expensive flagship model is only about 3%.
This raises an important question. Why did OpenAI expend all this engineering effort to release smaller, faster models instead of just deploying a massive new God model to crush Anthropic's Claude?
Because in the enterprise, speed and latency matter more than raw, exhaustive intelligence.
Speed is everything when you move from single-turn chatbots to autonomous agents. In the enterprise coding war, low latency and cost efficiency win over sluggish, comprehensive intelligence every time. Let's look at those benchmarks you mentioned, like SWE Bench Pro.
What does that actually measure mechanically?
It doesn't ask the AI a simple trivia question. It gives the AI a real, complex GitHub issue, points it to a repository containing thousands of files of code, and essentially says, find the bug and fix it.
To do that, the AI has to perform dozens of sequential steps.
Exactly. It has to read the issue, search the file directory, open a file, read the code, realize the bug isn't there, open another file, write a test, run the test, see it fail, rewrite the code, and run the test again. This is a massive multi-step agentic loop.
That sounds computationally exhausting.
It is. If you use a massive slow model for this, every single step might take 5 to 10 seconds of inference time. The loop becomes agonizingly slow and incredibly expensive in terms of compute costs.
The release notes specifically mention optimizing GPT 5.4 Mini to act as a sub-agent. What is the mechanical architecture of a sub-agent system?
Think of a complex enterprise task, like migrating an entire legacy database to a new, modern cloud architecture. You do not just ask one massive AI model to do the whole thing in a single continuous thought process.
The context window would overflow and it would hallucinate terribly.
Yes. Instead, you use a central orchestrator model. This orchestrator breaks the massive migration job down into hundreds of smaller, discrete tasks. It then deploys sub-agents, these smaller, cheaper, incredibly fast models like GPT 5.4 Mini or Nano, to tackle those specific tasks in parallel.
So it's delegation.
One sub-agent scans a table for data types, another writes a translation script for a specific column, another sub-agent runs a security check on the new schema.
Ah, I see. It's an assembly line. And if the workers on the assembly line are slow, or if they cost $1,000 an hour to employ, the whole factory grinds to a halt or bankrupts the company.
The architecture absolutely demands speed. OpenAI realized that to win the enterprise war against Anthropic, they don't just need the smartest, most philosophical model in the room. They need the fastest, most economically efficient army of digital workers.
And the fact that GPT 5.4 Mini can achieve within 3% of the performance of the massive model on software engineering benchmarks while operating twice as fast means it is the perfect, highly optimized soldier for these agentic swarms.
The release also notes it is highly proficient in computer use, specifically interpreting screenshots incredibly rapidly, which is absolutely crucial for agents that need to navigate human graphical user interfaces to complete tasks.
It's a total systemic shift in product philosophy. They have gone from, let's build a magical, godlike consumer app that writes Hollywood movies to let's build an incredibly fast, highly reliable, cheap gear to put inside an enterprise machine.
It perfectly cements this idea of consolidation alignment.
The entire industry is squeezing through the enterprise funnel because that is the only place where the economics and the platform control actually make sense.
Which brings us to the final and most foundational layer of this ecosystem puzzle.
Right, because if the future of the entire industry is enterprise coding, custom models operating behind corporate firewalls, and massive swarms of autonomous subagents who's providing the picks, the shovels, and the heavy machinery for this new reality.
Let's talk about the infrastructure warlords.
We have three massive, highly strategic moves from Mistral, Microsoft, and NVIDIA in the stack that show exactly how the battlefield for enterprise dominance is being drawn. Let's start with Mistral, the French AI lab. They just launched a platform called Forge.
Mistral has always played the role of the wild card in this industry, primarily by championing open-weight models that anyone can download. But Forge is a completely different, highly sophisticated beast.
It's a commercial offering, right?
Yes.
Best.
It is a commercial platform that hands massive enterprise clients the exact same foundational training recipes and infrastructure that Mistral uses internally to build their own frontier models.
The technical details here are what make this so significant. The announcement explicitly states that Forge is not just a basic fine-tuning service. We hear the term fine-tuning constantly taking an already trained general model like a GPT and giving it a few hundred specific examples to slightly tweak its tone or behavior.
Right, that's what most people are doing.
But Forge offers full pre-training from scratch, post-training, and full RL pipelines for the enterprise.
That distinction is monumental. Most enterprise AI deployment up to this point has been what we dismissively call wrapper solutions. A company takes a generic off-the-shelf model through an API, prompts it with some of their internal data, and hopes it's close enough for their workflow.
Which is incredibly limiting for a massive corporation.
Exactly. Mistral is making a completely different, highly lucrative bet. They are betting that major multinational corporations, defense contractors, global financial institutions, and sovereign governments do not want to rely on a generic black box model controlled by an American tech giant.
They want control.
They want a model trained entirely from the ground up on their own proprietary knowledge, adhering perfectly to their internal compliance rules, and deeply integrated into their specific code bases.
You mentioned RL pipelines. What does RL actually mean mechanically in this context, and why is it so much more powerful than fine-tuning?
RL stands for reinforcement learning, often specifically reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF. Mechanically, fine-tuning just shows the AI a static data set of good examples and says, copy this style.
Okay.
Reinforcement learning involves building a separate reward model. The AI generates multiple different answers to a complex coding problem, and the reward model scores them based on highly specific criteria like efficiency, security, or adherence to the company's specific coding syntax.
So it's actively learning through trial and error.
Over millions of iterations, the AI updates its own internal policies to maximize that score. It doesn't just learn what the right answer is. It learns the underlying logic of how the company defines a good answer. Setting up that RL pipeline requires immense engineering infrastructure, which is exactly what Forge provides.
And the absolute most critical selling point of Forge, the entire training and RL process can run entirely on a company's own localized servers with zero data exposure to Mistral.
Zero data exposure. In the enterprise sector, that is the ultimate magic phrase. It unlocks budgets that API wrappers can never touch.
Look at the contrast with Apple. While Apple is taking away execution rights and telling developers they cannot run dynamic code locally on an iPhone, Mistral is essentially pulling up in an 18-wheeler and handing the enterprise the keys to the entire AI manufacturing plant.
Here is the heavy machinery.
Exactly. They are telling massive corporations, here is the heavy machinery, put it behind your own firewall, train it on your own servers, build whatever autonomous systems you want. It's the ultimate bring your own sovereignty model.
And look at the caliber of the organizations buying into this. Early partners announced with Forge include ASML, Ericsson, and the European Space Agency. These are not companies building consumer chatbots.
No, the stakes are way higher.
ASML manufactures the incredibly complex, extreme ultraviolet lithography machines that print the world's most advanced microchips. They have massive repositories of highly sensitive, immensely valuable proprietary legacy code that runs laser calibrations.
And the European Space Agency.
The European Space Agency is using Mistral's infrastructure for everything from complex legacy code migration for satellite systems to the restoration of ancient manuscripts. These organizations would never, ever upload that proprietary data to a public OpenAI server or route it through a Microsoft API where it could be logged.
It's a national security risk at that level.
Exactly. Mistral recognized that true high-value enterprise adoption requires total data sovereignty, and they built the specific infrastructure to provide it. Furthermore, they just dropped their small 4 and Leandstral models, optimizing for that same fast sub-agent architecture we discussed with OpenAI, and they officially joined NVIDIA's Nematron coalition.
They are explicitly arming the enterprise rebellion against the closed APIs.
That's a great way to put it.
Meanwhile, over in Redmond, Washington, Microsoft is having what looks from the outside like a very expensive identity crisis. They just redrew their entire AI organizational chart, shuffling massive pieces of the board.
It is deeply telling of the immense internal and external pressures they are currently facing. The wrapper strategy is failing them.
The reorganization looks like this. Microsoft merged its highly fragmented Copilot product teams. They brought in a former Snap executive, Jacob Unraveled, to run this newly combined Copilot organization and try to figure out the user experience.
Which has been a mess.
But the much bigger news is what is happening with Mustafa Suleyman, the CEO of Microsoft AI. He is completely shifting his focus away from these consumer and enterprise product teams. His sole mandate now is a 5-year mission to build superintelligence, or AGI, entirely in-house at Microsoft.
To clear the runway for this, they even radically reworked their foundational partnership with OpenAI. They officially lifted a contractual ban that prevented Microsoft from doing solo development of frontier foundation models.
A ban that was originally supposed to run all the way through 2030.
So Microsoft is now explicitly, openly building its own frontier models to compete directly with, or eventually entirely replace, OpenAI's models powering their systems.
But let's look at the Copilot side of the house. Why the massive reorganization and the new executive leadership?
Because the adoption numbers are absolutely brutal and Wall Street is losing patience. Copilot is the AI assistant that Microsoft has pushed relentlessly, integrating it across Windows, Office 365, Teams, and GitHub.
But the leaked metrics show that Copilot only had 6 million daily active users in February.
6 million. For a company whose software sits on almost every corporate desk on Earth. Compare that to ChatGPT's 440 million users.
It's barely a blip. But the more damning metric is the enterprise penetration. The highly promoted, expensive enterprise add-on for Copilot has only reached 3% penetration among Office subscribers. 3%.
That is shockingly low.
Why is it failing to resonate? What is the mechanical friction point for the user?
The friction is that generic text generation inside a Word document does not actually solve complex enterprise workflows. Generating a polite email draft saves a user maybe 2 minutes. It is a neat trick, but it is not transformative.
It doesn't justify a massive enterprise license cost.
Exactly. True enterprise value comes from multi-step agentic execution, like an AI that can pull data from a Salesforce CRM, cross-reference it with an Excel spreadsheet, generate a comprehensive quarterly report, and automatically route it for compliance review.
And Copilot can't do that.
Copilot, in its current fragmented state, struggles immensely with those cross-application agentic loops. Users try it, find it only does basic text manipulation, realize it doesn't justify the massive per-seat enterprise license cost, and churn out.
So merging the fragmented teams under a new leader is a desperate triage maneuver to fix the product experience.
Yes. Satya Nadella is a brilliant strategist, and he is realizing that Microsoft cannot survive the next decade just being an incredibly lucrative but ultimately dependent wrapper for OpenAI's models.
Because if Anthropic wins the enterprise,
If they rely entirely on OpenAI's intelligence, and OpenAI is currently getting beaten by Anthropic in the high-margin enterprise sector, Microsoft's core business is vulnerable. They need to own the entire vertical stack, from the foundational superintelligent model layer that Suleyman is building in-house to a unified, actually useful product layer that Andreo is trying to fix.
Microsoft is realizing they desperately need their own internal ecosystem sovereignty, from the server farm all the way down to the individual Word document.
Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly most formidable infrastructure warlord in the space, NVIDIA.
We talked about them briefly at the start with their OpenClaw agents, but Jensen Huang's keynote at the GTC conference was essentially a highly detailed roadmap for the next decade of computing architecture.
It was a flex of unparalleled monopolistic dominance.
He announced the Vera Rubin platform. This isn't just a new graphics card you plug into a motherboard. It's a massive 7-chip, 5-computer rack that he explicitly calls an AI factory. It features the new Grok 3 LPU, and it's slated for availability in the second half of this year.
But beyond the hardware specs, it was his philosophical pivot that was so striking.
He stated, flat out to the entire industry, the future is not just going to be about LLMs. The future is about agentic systems.
And there's the critical concept again, agents. NVIDIA isn't just selling chips, they are building the software infrastructure to ensure those chips are used in a specific way. They are deeply integrating their open source Nematron models into the OpenClaw ecosystem.
Right.
They launched NemaClaw and a framework called OpenShell, which specifically provides policy-based guardrails for privacy and security.
Because, as the news stack noted, agents can do a lot more useful work, but they can also cause a catastrophic amount of damage.
Absolutely.
If you have a swarm of autonomous AI agents running around your corporate network, dynamically executing code, reading databases, and changing file structures, you need massive zero-trust security infrastructure to ensure they don't accidentally delete the payroll database or exfiltrate proprietary source code.
But what's truly fascinating here is NVIDIA's underlying structural motivation. Why is Jensen Huang, a hardware CEO, pushing so incredibly hard for the adoption of autonomous, self-evolving claw agents?
It's a good question.
Why is he cheerleading this renaissance in software and building the OpenShell guardrails to make it safe for the enterprise?
If we look at the whole board, if the consumer app store is locked down by Apple and Meta's consumer VR dream is dead, and everyone from OpenAI to Microsoft to Mistral is pivoting fiercely to enterprise coding and complex autonomous agents, who actually captures the majority of the economic value here?
NVIDIA wins. Hands down, by an order of magnitude, NVIDIA wins.
Let's break down the compute economics of why. It all comes down to the tokens, right?
It comes down to continuous inference. Autonomous agents are the most compute-intensive, token-hungry AI systems ever conceived by humanity. Let's compare the mechanics. Think about a standard consumer-level ChatGPT interaction. You ask the model a question. Write me a recipe for lasagna. The model processes the prompt, streams an answer, and stops. It generates maybe 500 tokens. It is a single, linear, highly bounded transaction. The inference compute stops the moment the text finishes generating.
Right. It's computationally cheap.
Now, think about the mechanical loop of an OpenClaw agent tasked with an enterprise objective. The prompt is, research our top 3 competitors' pricing changes over the last quarter, cross-reference it with our internal sales data, write a strategic pricing recommendation report, and email it to the executive team.
That's not a single generation.
Not even close. The agent has to think and create a plan. That consumes tokens. It uses a search tool to scrape 10 different websites. It has to ingest and process all the text from those websites. Massive context window token consumption.
And it hasn't even written the report yet.
Exactly. It extracts the relevant pricing data. It opens an internal SQL database, writes a query, runs it, and ingests the sales data. It writes a draft of the report. It uses another subagent to verify the math in the draft. The subagent finds an error, so the main agent rewrites the section. It then interfaces with the Outlook API and hits send.
That is exhausting just to describe.
That single enterprise task requires continuous looping inference. It might generate, consume, and discard 50,000 tokens over the course of 5 minutes.
As Huang implicitly knows, when you shift the paradigm from chatbots answering questions to agents executing complex, multi-step workflows, the absolute need for compute expands exponentially.
Exactly. More autonomous problems, vastly more money for NVIDIA. Expanding the problem space to agents requires massively more compute to train the foundation models. It requires more security infrastructure like OpenShell to govern their actions. And crucially, it requires an astronomical, unprecedented amount of inference compute.
Which explains the specific hardware choices in the Vera Rubin platform. You mentioned the Grok 3 LPU. Let's explain mechanically how an LPU is different from the traditional GPUs NVIDIA is famous for and why it matters for agents.
A traditional GPU, a graphics processing unit, was originally designed to render video games. It excels at parallel processing, doing thousands of relatively simple math calculations at the exact same time, like calculating the trajectory of thousands of pixels of light.
And that architecture was coincidentally perfect for the massive matrix multiplications required to train massive AI models.
But inference, actually running the model to generate text, is a different mechanical process.
Yes, language models generate text sequentially, one token at a time. The model predicts the next word, then uses that word to predict the next word. It is a linear, sequential process, not a parallel one.
Exactly. An LPU, or language processing unit, is a specialized chip architecture designed specifically to process that sequential token generation incredibly fast with virtually zero latency.
And as we established with OpenAI subagents, when you have an autonomous loop of agents talking to each other, latency is the enemy. If every step of the agent's thought process takes 2 seconds of GPU processing time, the multi-step task takes forever.
The Grok 3 LPU is designed to process those tokens instantly, allowing the agentic loops to run at the speed of thought.
NVIDIA is building these Vera Rubin AI factories, heavily featuring LPUs, because they know the enterprise world is about to need 1 billion times more low-latency inference capacity. When every single employee at a Fortune 500 company has a team of 5 autonomous subagents constantly working in the background, reading files, scraping data, and writing code, the token consumption will be staggering.
It is the ultimate, perfected arms dealer strategy. NVIDIA does not care if OpenAI's subagents or Anthropic's Claude or Mistral's Forge wins the enterprise coding war.
They win either way.
They do not care if Microsoft manages to fix Copilot's user interface. Every single one of those companies and every enterprise deploying their models requires massive, low-latency agentic compute to survive the transition. NVIDIA is pouring the concrete and selling the electrical grid for the foundations of this entirely new enterprise reality.
It is an incredibly brilliant and unimaginably lucrative choke point to occupy. They own the ultimate ecosystem sovereignty because everyone else's software ecosystem relies entirely on their hardware physics.
Well said.
To briefly weave in the remainder of the AI news from this dense March 18th stack, it all points uniformly toward this massive industry maturation and the focus on serious, verifiable business utility. The wild, consequence-free experimental days of 2023 are definitely over.
Without a doubt.
Sam Altman's World Company just launched AgentKit. This is highly specific infrastructure designed to verify that a real, authenticated human being is actually the one authorizing an AI shopping agent to make a transaction.
They are building the cryptographic handshakes necessary to manage an internet that is about to be populated predominantly by autonomous bots executing financial transactions.
Exactly. It's about trust and verification at scale. Meanwhile, Google is pushing its personal intelligence feature deeply across the Chrome browser and the Gemini ecosystem, integrating AI directly into everyday, mundane workflows rather than treating it as a separate destination.
And Gamma introduced their Imagine tool.
Right, which is an AI design system baked directly into enterprise presentation software that automatically reads and applies strict corporate brand styling guidelines.
Look at the common thread here. It is no longer about generating a hyper-realistic, hallucinated video to wow people on social media. It is about verifying commercial transactions, integrating tightly into legacy enterprise suites, automating tedious corporate design work, and writing functional code.
The technology has cut its hair, put on a suit, and gone to work in the office.
That's exactly what happened.
So what does this all mean for you?
It means you need to fundamentally reevaluate your assumptions about where the value is being created, where you should be building your products, and where you should be allocating your investments. The map has been redrawn.
We are looking at a technology landscape that has abruptly and quite brutally sobered up. The grand consumer metaverse, driven by billions of dollars of subsidized VR headsets, is essentially a failed side quest, a massive miscalculation of consumer appetite and form factor friction.
Rest in peace, Horizon Worlds on Quest.
Vibe coding, the utopian dream of generating dynamic software natively on your phone to solve any problem instantly, is being systematically smothered in its crib by Apple's strict ecosystem sovereignty, their 30% tax, and rules like Guideline 2.5.2.
In direct response to impenetrable consumer gatekeepers, massive titans like OpenAI and Microsoft are hitting the panic button.
They're dropping their shiny, highly publicized consumer toys like Sora, calling code reds, and refocusing entirely on high-margin enterprise value, data sovereignty platforms like Mistral's Forge, and high-speed developer tools.
The infinite open frontier has closed, the walls have been built, and the survivors are retreating behind the corporate firewall where they can actually control the rules of execution and avoid absolute platform risk.
The playground is closed. The real systemic architectural work is beginning.
Absolutely.
If you want to hear the highly technical version of this Gatekeeper analysis, where we dive even deeper into the specific API limitations, the mechanical details of the RLHF pipelines, and the granular policy restrictions shaping this enterprise pivot, head over to the ads-free Jamgamine feed for our premium deep dive.
And I want to leave you with one final unmentioned thread to ponder as we watch this new reality unfold over the next few years. We have established today that Apple will aggressively ban dynamic code execution to protect its App Store revenue and maintain its walled garden.
Yep, the fortress is locked.
But as NVIDIA's autonomous OpenClaw agents and Anthropic's dispatch systems become the absolute standard for how businesses operate and how software is written, will Apple eventually be forced into an impossible choice?
What do you mean?
Will they have to choose between maintaining their total, uncompromising ecosystem sovereignty or watching the iPhone slowly degrade into a dumb, obsolete brick that is fundamentally incapable of communicating with the actual agentic economy happening everywhere else?
Yeah.
The unstoppable force of agentic compute is about to meet the unmovable object of Apple's platform governance.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
That concludes our second rundown for March 18th. The signal for tonight is ecosystem sovereignty. Innovation in 2026 is no longer just about the code you write. It's about the permission you have to run it. This episode was made possible by Area and Jamgamind. Until tomorrow, keep unraveling the future.
And before you go, if your company is building the tools that power the workflows we talked about today, I'd love to showcase them to this audience. We don't just run ads. We build technical simulations that prove your value. Let's build something together. Visit jamgamind.com/partners to get started. Until next time, keep building.